This photo shows how much we've changed in terms of our common sense, right? So you don't need to have a Cert 4 in WHS to go, okay, there's some safety hazards going on there. Like this, someone not wearing a T-shirt, not sure if he's wearing sun cream or not. There's no hard hats. Got a couple of guys having a smoke, guy over on the right, possibly drinking alcohol, not quite sure what's in that bottle. And then, of course, the blatant lack of safety harnesses. So we now in 2025 have established a certain degree of collective wisdom and collective experience where we go, it is the employer, there is an obligation on our employer to keep us safe whilst we're at work. So we come to work physically safe, and we and our families expect that we would go home safe. And if there's something in our job, there's some kind of inherent requirement that we will be exposed to something dangerous. For example, I was with the police this morning, DFS, all sorts of different jobs. We expect that the employer will take reasonable steps, do all that's reasonably practicable to manage those hazards. So we expect them to invest in resources and money, in training and procedures, and do what's necessary to eliminate that risk if possible, or to minimise the impact of that risk on us as workers. So that's 1934. We've come a long way since then. And in 2022, we've had some huge changes in our legislation, which saw the inclusion of psychosocial hazards as part of safety. So anyone involved in safety will be familiar with this process. So we've been doing this for years, identifying hazards, assessing risks, putting in some controls, and then monitoring and reviewing. And we go round and round this circle, making sure we're doing all that's reasonably practicable to make sure people are safe. So the organisation does that at a macro level, managers do that, and we all do that as workers at an individual level. So this is the framework that we now need to apply to psychosocial hazards. So this is our code of practice, which WorkSafe gave us in 2022. All states in Australia have a code of practice pretty similar to our one. Safe Work Australia has some guidance, so all the states are fairly similar, and we've got some clients all over Australia that use similar codes of practice. Now, people won't necessarily use the language that's in the code of practice, but they'll say things like this. They'll say things like, I'm emotionally exhausted. I can't sleep because I just keep thinking about it. That wasn't fair. I feel stressed. So these are the types of things that we say when we're exposed to psychosocial hazards. So there's also now an international standard for the management of psychosocial hazards. And I just want to bring your attention to this one. So this is cut straight out of the WA Code of Practice, and it is burnout. So they've defined burnout as a psychological and physical response to chronic work-related stress. So that could be different examples are emotionally demanding work with low support or control, insufficient time for rest and recovery. Essentially, when we are rushing, we are rushing. Now, originally when I came across this, what I thought was probably happening was something along the lines of senior execs put pressure on managers, so we need to achieve more, we need to achieve more, we need to achieve more. Then managers would put pressure on workers, and then workers would be rushing and rushing and rushing. And I think that does happen. But what I'm actually seeing more often than that is we put pressure on ourselves. So it's our conscientious, hardworking people that want to do a good job, and we push and we push and we push and we say yes and we say yes and we say yes. And it's not necessarily our manager or our leaders who are doing that to us, but we will often do that ourselves. So it's a bit of both is going on. So essentially, we all need to understand that process, what happens when we push ourselves. So we're going to talk now about cortisol, which is the chemical of stress. So this is the molecule. Now, your amygdala, which is just behind your ears, is scanning the world for threats. When your amygdala picks up a threat, could be real or imagined, it's going to send a message to your pituitary gland. And then your pituitary gland is going to pump this chemical out into your system. Every single cell in your body has a cortisol receptor. So I'm just going to get some involvement from the crowd right now. So if you could open your chat box, and can you put in the chat, what are some of the physical symptoms that we can experience as human beings when our stress levels come up. So there's about 15 things that can happen to us. But what happens to you perhaps, or people that you know as they become stressed? Okay, we've got tingly skin, sweaty, and it's a different type of sweat when it's from stress. It's a more slippery type of sweat. Fatigue eventually, so we usually get higher energy first, but then later on. Nausea, yes, so that's part of our digestive system, which is shutting down. We've got clenched jaw, and often I get it in my shoulders as my shoulders come up, and I sometimes get the grumpy frown lines as well. Now, these are all coming up one at a time. I'm just going to see if I can see them as a list. No, I can't. I can only see them at one at a time. Okay, I want to come back to the one nausea and talk a little bit more about that, because that's connected to a whole stack of physical symptoms that happen. So as our cortisol levels start to come up, blood flow leaves our digestive system and goes into those big muscle groups. So Frank has got it there. So our digestive tract will start trying to empty itself because it's decided it is not a good time to digest food. So some people will get a dry mouth because saliva is part of cortisol. Some people will throw up, and I remember that at sports carnivals that kids would throw up either before or after races. Often we'll get upset tummies, and we'll often hear our kids saying, I've got a tummy ache, and that could be them saying, I'm stressed or my cortisol is high, but they don't have that language, so they just say, I've got a tummy ache. The phrase I'm SHITing myself, you might have heard of that. If your cortisol goes up fast enough, that is what will happen. And feeling like we need to pee. So that's all signs that our blood flow is leaving our digestive system and going into our big muscles. The other system that shuts down when we are stressed is our immune system. So normally when we relax, we've got lots of blood flow going to our organs, and they're a part of immunity, but that all shuts down too. Somebody mentioned heart rate. So throughout the day, your heart rate's going up and down. I'll just give you a moment to see if you can feel your own heart rate. Some people can't. Some people have it on their watch. And see if you can feel your own breathing. Often it's a bit easier. People find it easier to feel their own breathing. And as you watch yourself breathe, just notice how much of your lungs are you actually using. Because when we're calm and relaxed, we use all of our lungs. We go right down to the back and bottom of the lungs, and the exhalation is usually long and smooth. The more stressed we are, the more we start to use the top part of our lungs. So our breathing can go like this. And I can actually feel my cortisol levels coming up as I do that. And then some people, and I was coaching an incredible leader right at the top of the Rio Tinto building. And she was a brilliant leader, but she often felt under pressure. She often felt stressed. And what she was doing, she would actually hold her breath without realizing it. And she'd go, and she'd be doing her work holding her breath, which was completely shifting her brain chemistry, which was changing her leadership style and changing how she communicates. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, the foundation skill that I want you to know, and I taught emotional intelligence in prisons for 12 years. I taught anger management in men's prisons. And the most important thing when it comes to EI is knowing what state we're in, knowing how stressed we are, knowing where our cortisol levels are at. And the earlier we catch it, the easier it is to manage. I think you got most of these. The most important and obvious ones are heart rate and breathing. So I want everyone to start paying attention to their heart rate and their breathing, and then choose one other early warning sign that your cortisol levels are starting to come up. Might be shaky, knocking knees. Some people get goosebumps. Some people get red flushes. So I want you to have 3 that you can pay attention to, so you can start to monitor your cortisol levels throughout the day. And somebody mentioned brain fogginess, and it's interesting what happens in our brain when we get these changes in cortisol levels. So when we are really calm and relaxed, the part of our brain which is operating is right up the front here. We get lots of blood flow behind our forehead to our prefrontal cortex. Now, the more cortisol we have in our system, so the more of those signs we're getting, raised heart rate, changes in breathing, the more blood flow is coming down the back here to our brain stem, to our cerebellum and parts of our limbic system. So that's actually changing how our brain functions and how our brain operates. Now, it seems, if you're anything like me, this can be really annoying. So this whole system that will start going off sometimes can feel really maladaptive, as in it's not really helping us. So if I'm about to stand up on a stage and speak to a whole bunch of people, my cortisol levels will often start coming up, which is one reason why I like that acknowledgement of country, actually, because I can really feel a shift in my brain chemistry when I ground and I feel gravity and I connect to the earth, and then I think of all the people I have in my life that support me. It really shifts me pretty quickly and changes how I communicate and changes how I show up. So that's one reason why I love doing the acknowledgement of country that way, because it actually helps me personally to be more authentic in the way I communicate. All right, so why does all this happen? Our cortisol's coming up, we're getting sweaty, we're getting hot, you're about to go on stage and speak, or you're running late for work, or you're at your desk trying to do complete a report that's due in half an hour's time. It really feels like it doesn't help. Why do we have this system? Well, about 10,000 years ago, it was probably pretty useful because the types of threats and that we encountered back then were, it was a great system to have. So it's our fight, flight, freeze system. So I just want to imagine for a moment that we are a tribe, And Franca, I might use you as the example today. So Franca, our incredible fearless leader, director of CEO, but now it's 10,000 years ago, so whatever she's operating is a bit different back then. And Franca has decided to go off on an adventure on her own. Okay, so we have the safety of home base, but she's a high dopamine person, which I know she is. So she's gone off on her own, looking for possibility and opportunity, something that could benefit the tribe in some way. And off on her adventure, she's a couple of Ks away, she comes across something she doesn't understand. And it's got fangs and it's a bit shaggy and she doesn't know what it is. She's never seen it before and she doesn't have language for it. Now, if Franco was a positive, optimistic and friendly human being, what do you reckon she'd do? She'd go over and try and make friends with this thing and see if there's some kind of collaborative opportunity. So what happened to our friendly, positive and optimistic human beings? Boom, they got taken out of the gene pool. So from a mental health perspective, there's all this rhetoric about we need to be more positive. I've got books on my shelf here, The Optimistic Mindset. We need to be positive. From a mental health perspective, being positive is great. From a survival perspective, it is not good. So there is a huge part of your brain that does not want you to be positive. It wants you to be suspicious, it wants you to be negative, and it wants you to be pessimistic. So let's just imagine for a moment that Franca was suspicious, negative, and pessimistic. Okay, so she's got a lot of cortisol. She comes across this thing she doesn't understand, and her cortisol goes through the roof, and then she goes into the freeze response. So freeze is basically play dead, don't make a sound, and don't speak. Hold your breath, and we can often feel a lot of tightness. And if you've ever been in a stressful situation and you found it hard to communicate, this is often part of the reason why. So we freeze, we don't make a sound. And that works for Franca for a moment, but then the thing comes over. So Franca goes into fight. So she grabs a rock and she starts fighting this thing and she manages to make it lame. So then she drops the rock and she legs it as fast as she can back to the safety of home base. And when she gets here, we say to her, oh my goodness, Franca, what just happened? Please tell us. Please share your experience. Please share your wisdom with the rest of the tribe so we can learn from what you've been through to help the rest of us stay safe. So she gets to communicate her experience with people that she cares about. Then, most likely, there would have been some kind of processing, perhaps art or dance. Then Franca would have eaten super healthy food, and then she would have gone into deep rest. And that is actually quite healthy. So is stress good or bad for us? Well, it depends on whether we complete the stress cycle. So as it turns out, getting stressed is actually probably okay for about twice a week for about 2 hours at a time. So if you get stressed, you're rushing, you're trying to get something done, it's a Monday afternoon, you're trying to get through it all. And then you exercise, then you talk to people that care about you and that you care about, then you eat super healthy food, then you get deep rest. That's good for you. And maybe again, that happens again on a Friday. So when we complete the stress cycle, stress can actually be good for us physically and it can be good for us mentally. However, as I'm sure you're all aware, what happens for so many of us is we get stressed, but we don't complete the stress cycle. So our cortisol comes up. We're not even necessarily aware that our heart rate's gone up, our breathing has changed, maybe we're a bit sweaty. We don't exercise, we don't talk to people that care about us, we don't process our emotions with music and art, we don't eat super healthy food, and we don't get deep rest. And we wake up the next morning and all of that cortisol is still in our system. And that's when stress can lead to physical and mental health problems. So understanding stress is really important, particularly when it comes to burnout, and we'll get into the science of that in a minute. So I'm just going to show you this guy, and I want you to make an assessment. Is he in fight, flight, or freeze? So you can pop it in the chat box. Do you reckon he was going into fight, flight, or freeze? Fight, fight, fight. You've got it. So you can see that. So about 45% of the population have a stronger fight response. About 55% of the population have a stronger flight response. We all have freeze because when we were babies, that's all we had. And some of us get both. And that's why we all as human beings have issues with either anxiety or anger, and often both, because we're constantly navigating. I remember our nervous system doesn't want us to be positive and happy and peaceful. It wants us to be on alert for survival threats. And I remember learning about this. I was at Murdoch Uni and my son was 2 years old at the time, and we were walking down a road and it was a curved road and there wasn't much room for pedestrians and it was very quiet, and I'm holding his little hand. And then all of a sudden a car comes flying around the corner. So in that moment, I went, so back up against the wall and I held my breath. Fight, a freeze, like flight and then freeze. My 2-year-old son, he leaned forward, boom, and he punched the car as the car went past. And I just kind of went, what the heck was that? So that wasn't a learned behavior. He'd never seen anybody do that, but he's got a very strong fight response. So that tends to mean if there's conflict or something potentially threatening, he will tend to move towards that. Whereas other people with a stronger flight will tend to move away from that. And a big part of what we do in our EEO training across all sorts of subjects is we teach people, often leaders, but everyone, how to have conversations. And if you've got a strong fight response and you're a leader, you're going to be really good at calling out inappropriate behaviors. You want to get in there and have difficult conversations. You're going to be honest and direct. The danger is you might raise your voice, you might use aggressive body language, so you need to be careful of that. If you've got a really strong flight response, you're not going to want to have those conversations. So there's a huge part of your brain that will be saying to you, no, don't back away, get out of that. And your brain will tell you all sorts of things to help you get out of that conversation. And if you're a leader, it's actually really important that you have that conversation. So there's no kind of good or bad here. We just have different styles of brains, and that's why we need a range of people in our work teams and in our tribes. One thing that is interesting about cortisol is it changes what we read in other people's facial expressions. So when our cortisol levels are low, we perceive neutral faces as friendly and kind. When our cortisol level is high, we perceive neutral faces as aggressive. So when our eyes are not just receiving information, we are also projecting information onto the world. And what we project onto the world changes as our cortisol level changes. So as you can imagine, we are bouncing off each other all of the time, and cortisol is actually contagious. So we can saliva swab it. It's cortisol's in our saliva. When we were children, when we were small, we mirrored the cortisol level of our parents and our carers and our teachers. As adults, we mirror the cortisol level of our leader. of our leader. So one of the best things, if you're a leader, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to look after yourself, because that's going to have immediate flow-on impact to the other people in your team. Okay, we're going to talk about what we can do to look after our cortisol levels in a moment. So this is your vagus nerve, biggest nerve in your body, and its whole job is to get you out of that fight, flight, freeze response and get you back into a state that we call rest and digest. So a calm state where you're digesting food well and your immune system is working properly. So I just want you to take a moment to think now, what is it that you do in your life already that helps you manage your stress levels? So can you pop that into the chat box for us? What do you do before work, after work, weekends, perhaps during work? If you feel your stress coming up, what can you do? Exercise. And Bracco's research says that's actually the most important. Walking, particularly walking in nature, is really good. Meditation. So I'll just come back to nature. 20 minutes in nature with no technology drops our cortisol levels as much as taking one Valium. Right? 20 minutes in nature, paying attention, getting outside in the fresh air, looking at the clouds and the trees and the ocean, breathing deeply. So breath is like water. Cortisol is like cordial. And as soon as we have cortisol in our, dance, I did a whole workshop on the neuroscience of dance. As soon as we start to breathe, that cortisol starts to dissipate and to get diluted in our system. Lighting a candle. Now, somebody's talked about sleep as well. Can we control how much we sleep? Well, not necessarily. Can we influence the quality of our sleep? Absolutely. And that's really important when we're looking at all the brain chemistry. There's loads of things that happen in our brain when we're asleep. A massage once a week, that's lovely. And anything that releases oxytocin. So spending time with people that we care about, that we feel safe with, we feel like they've got our back, that's going to release oxytocin. So we won't have time to talk about oxytocin today, but it is another chemical released by our pituitary gland that physically heals us from the damage done by stress. So the stress that cortisol does to our heart physically, oxytocin literally heals that. Okay, so there's a whole stack of things that we can do to get our cortisol levels down. Now, this is stuck on my fridge. It's a cortisol thermometer. I'm hoping that right now your cortisol is between probably a 3 and a 4, somewhere around here, so that you're alert and you're awake, but that you're not stressed. So hopefully there's not much tension in your shoulders. Hopefully you're breathing in a fairly relaxed way, and much better if we can catch it early. So I want to catch my cortisol level when it's at about maybe a 5 or a 6. Often at a 6, we won't notice, but other people can tell that we're getting a bit stressed because our voice will change and different things will happen. Voice is a really powerful one. How we use our voice impacts our stress levels, and likewise, our voice changes depending on our stress levels. So here's some of the things that you guys mentioned. Compassionate intent is one of the big ones. So as Martin Seligman's research actually says, compassionate intent is the biggest one. I just want to come back to breathing. I'm sure a lot of you already do breathing techniques. So there's all sorts of apps and YouTube videos, and they're all great, all the ones I've seen. The Australian Defence Force does one that's called command breathing, and you're welcome to do that with us now. So it's pretty simple. We just inhale. And then at the top of the inhalation, there's a gasp. Hold and feel the stretch in the intercostal muscles as you hold. And then exhale slow and controlled through the nose. And I can feel my cortisol levels coming down immediately. So they have to do it 3 times, but just doing it once, I can feel the difference. So start clocking your cortisol levels throughout the day. Now, there's one more thing I want to say about cortisol levels. And I've been studying stress for a while, and there was a whole stack of discourse. Stress is bad for us. It makes us sick. It impacts our mental health, all sorts of things. And it is true that stress can have that effect on us. So if you're about to do something stressful, let's say, for example, you're about to give a presentation at work and you can feel your stress levels rising. So in that moment, your heart rate will be increasing. And at the top here, you can see the arteries have contracted. So at the top here, those arteries have contracted. So the heart is racing and the arteries have gotten thicker. So that's not particularly healthy for us to be in that state. So if we're going into that state, we can feel our cortisol levels rising and we say to ourselves, oh my goodness, this is terrible, I'm not coping. Then the arteries in our heart go and they contract a little bit further. So not great for us. Now, something pretty incredible happens. If, as we notice our cortisol levels coming up, if we feel our heart rate rising, if we feel ourselves getting sweaty and our breathing is changing, we feel that tension coming in our muscles. If we say to ourselves, this is my body helping me rise to this challenge. That racing heart, no problem. It's getting extra oxygen into my muscles. The tension in my shoulders, no problem. It's making me stronger. I'm getting physically and mentally stronger right now. This is my body preparing me for this task. If we say that to ourselves, then our heart will still race, but our arteries open. So our stress response responds to the narrative that we give it. So this is really important because that's a much healthier physiological profile. And it's actually the biology of courage. So we can use our stress response to help us physically and mentally stronger. And there's some really cool work that's come out after the Black Fires of 2019, where a whole stack of our emergency service people were on call for basically 8 months and the fires were just raging. Trauma after trauma after trauma, exhausted, not getting enough sleep. And a percentage of people got PTSD, as we would expect. But there's another phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. So we can be exposed to trauma as a human and we either go into PTSD or post-traumatic growth. So trauma will impact us, but we can go one way or the other. And what are all the different factors that contribute to it going into post-traumatic growth? And collegial support was one of them. Collegial support. So having a team of people that have got our back, a belief that our stress system is good for us and we're actually getting stronger and braver in response to the stress that we are experiencing. So I don't want you to walk away from today feeling like stress is bad for you. And with the EEO, we get to work with some incredible people. You know, for example, the police who respond to family violence and DFES and different organisations. And we want them to know that when we connect to what is meaningful, it's actually much better for our health than avoiding discomfort. So if we just spend our life trying to avoid being stressed, we actually don't end up with good mental health. So what's better for our health is chase meaning, do things that are important, that you believe are worthwhile, and then our resilience level actually goes through the roof. So if we're doing something that we care about, we back ourselves to handle the stress, and we've got a team of people around us that we feel supported by, our resilience as human beings is actually quite incredible. So that is the human stress response, which is a big part of the burnout puzzle. So I want you to remember all of that. And we're now going to move into dopamine. Hands up if you've heard of dopamine. I'm sure lots of your hands are up now. I hear it on the radio quite often. So it's the chemical of drive. When our dopamine's up, we feel inspired, we feel alive, our IQ goes up, we're able to rewire our brain faster. So it's a great chemical to have flowing at work. It makes us productive, it makes us determined, we feel a sense of desire and direction, it makes us goal-orientated. We just kind of can't wait to get started and go through our to-do list. Tick, 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 right? So it's that state of being in flow. It makes us sharper and it makes us see more color in the world. So our retina changes when our dopamine levels come up. Now, I would love for it to be high all the time. However, sometimes, as with all of these chemicals, they go up and down. When it goes down, we feel bored, we feel apathy, lazy, can't be bothered, and depressed. And just for a moment, think about how many people work at your organization. Think about all of those brains. When we're firing and our dopamine level's high, we're at 100% productivity. So we're doing the best that we can. We feel fantastic and we're getting lots done. As our dopamine levels start to drop, our productivity can drop by 50%. So if you're in an organisation that isn't looking after people's dopamine levels, all of those workers are going to be trying to get their work done or not with their dopamine levels depleted. So this is really important for well-being, but also for productivity. So I just want you to think for a moment about a job that you have to do at work that you don't like doing. So something that you have to do, you don't really enjoy is, oh, I'm like, no, I have to do this again. Because we want you to love your work, but we know whatever our job is, there's always going to be aspects of it that we don't particularly enjoy. If you go into that task with low dopamine, you're not going to do a particularly good job. You'll probably make more mistakes and you won't care if you make mistakes. Not good for you, not good for the organization. So what can we do to get our dopamine levels up? Let's just a moment for imagine the job I have to do is cleaning my house. So I've dropped my kids off at school. It's my day off. I come home and the whole house is trashed, right? So it's likely at that moment my shoulders will drop, my dopamine will plummet, and I'll say to myself, oh, why do I have to do this? This is boring. What's the point? They're just going to mess it up again anyway. I'll start doing the job, but I don't really care. I'm making mistakes. Oh, I'm not enjoying it. I'm not going to do a good job. So what can I do? Okay, there's a few things I can do. One is hopefully I got a good night's sleep the night before. It is hard to make dopamine when we're low on sleep. Secondly, I'm going to have a drink of water. Hard to make dopamine when we're dehydrated. I'm going to look at my thoughts because there's a super highway from my thinking center, my language center, to my pineal gland, which is the gland that starts to pump this out. And if I'm saying to myself, this sucks, what's the point? I don't want to do this, dopamine, blah, 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 goes down. If I say to myself, I get to do this. If I say to myself, this is going to be fantastic once it's done. If I start to visualize my job complete, if I break it down into achievable steps. So probably what I would do, and this is what I actually do, is I have a drink of water, I have a banana because I need tyrosine to make dopamine, and then I'm going to go for a walk. And it's going to be a walk in a straight line with good posture. I'll probably put some music on, some high tempo music, and I'll be walking quite quickly with a clear line of direction. I have got a goalpost, like a tree or a lamppost in the distance. I'm going to walk straight towards it, visualizing my goal complete and thinking positive thoughts. This is going to be fantastic once I get the house clean with a break it, right, and start marching. Just doing that for 5 minutes, and my dopamine is going to be significantly higher. So I'm going to come home, I'm going to get in there, I broke it. Instead of trying to clean the whole house, I'm just focusing on the kitchen, and now I'm cleaning the pans and I'm putting them away and I'm shining the glasses and I'm feeling good about what I do. And I go for half an hour and then I stop, I take a look at what I've done and I go, yes, good job. And I give myself some serotonin. So we can't have high levels of dopamine all day. It is going to undulate up and down. This is why we have breaks. So in those breaks, before you break, give yourself a moment to pause, reflect on what you have achieved, let your cortisol come right down, let your dopamine come right down, and give yourself some serotonin, i.e. healthy pride, particularly at the end of the day, Look at all you have achieved. Now, this will be hard because we have a negativity bias, so we tend to look at all that we didn't achieve, and then our serotonin and our dopamine drop. But serotonin and dopamine loop off each other. So it's important we're pausing to give ourselves moments of healthy pride. Now, dopamine is really good at making us want to do things. It's not very good at deciding if those things are actually good for us. So just be careful because your dopamine can lead you all down all sorts of paths that may not be particularly healthy for you. Very good at making you want to do things, not good at deciding the long-term health benefits of that. And we can end up putting loads of energy into things that are not actually good for us and cut us off from deeper sources of joy. And then our dopamine is depleted and we feel exhausted. So here's some dopaminergic pathways. The green one is the one that we are born with, and that's the I see it, I want it pathway. We don't have to practice it. We all just have that immediately. Now, the blue one is the one that goes through our prefrontal cortex, and we're not born with that one, and it develops slowly over time. They say that males have this fully developed by age 25, females probably by about age 18, but there's all sorts of variation that can happen within that, somewhat dependent on life experiences. And also, do we train ourselves, do we train our kids in thinking long term? So the green one is all about instant gratification. I see it and I want it. I'm highly motivated to go and eat that cinnamon donut. Right, I see it, I smell it, and I feel this rush of energy to go and get it. The long-term pathway can think thoughts along the lines of what's in the best interest for me and my tribe over the next 6 months. So, for example, you might be making various decisions as to what type of policies to implement. A classic one is how much to invest in psychosocial hazard management. So I'm sure there's multiple things that you need to be doing in your workplace. There's all sorts of competing priorities. And as leaders, we have to think, right, what's really important? What decisions, what policies do we need to implement so that the business goes well over the long term? Not just achieving what we're doing today, but what are we going to achieve? What do we want our organisation to be like in 6 months' time, in 3 years' time? So it's that strategic planning and that strategic overview that all happens up the front here in the prefrontal cortex. And of course, as leaders, if you're a leader, that's the part of your brain that we want you to be thinking about. If I make this decision, this is likely to happen for the organisation in the future. If I make this decision, this is likely to happen. And what's the part of our brain we lose when we get stressed? This part. We lose our prefrontal cortex and all the energy's way down the back here. This part of your brain, the part that's active when your cortisol is up, does not care about the future. It doesn't care about the feelings of other people. It doesn't care about your social reputation. It certainly doesn't care about your code of conduct. All this back part of your brain cares about is you and keeping you alive. And when it's really active, it can see about 5 seconds into the future. So it's not the part of the brain that we want to be running the show, particularly if you're a leader. But yet the irony of this, of course, is being a leader, you've often got multiple things that you're trying to manage and there's all sorts of stresses that you encounter and you're going to get these cortisol spikes throughout the day. I just want you to be aware of that. The brain chemistry of leadership is quite high emotional intelligence skills that we need to practice to be a good leader. Okay. One more thing I want to talk to you about the chemical reaction in terms of burnout. So I've talked about how we make dopamine. So we eat tyrosine, it's in food like bananas, lots of other food. We then convert our tyrosine into L-DOPA. We then convert L-DOPA into dopamine. Dopamine is a really good long-term source of energy. So if our dopamine's high, we can be productive day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. So we can contribute an enormous amount to our organisations and to the world if we look after our dopamine levels. But there's one extra conversion that happens if we have too much cortisol in our system. If there's too much cortisol in our system, we start converting our dopamine into adrenaline. And adrenaline is not a good long-term energy source. So adrenaline will give us energy now for a couple of hours right now. It might make us more productive today, but it does not make us more productive over the long term because we become depleted. And that's what burnout is. It's when we're converting our dopamine into adrenaline, our dopamine is becoming depleted. We go into adrenal fatigue and then we just feel exhausted. And unfortunately, what we see is a new person comes into the organisation, their dopamine's really high, they're really productive, they're an incredible contributor, they're getting so much work done, they're smashing it out of the park, everyone's going, wow, you're amazing. And they push themselves and they push themselves and they say yes and they say yes and they don't know how to say no and they don't understand what's happening. They're converting their dopamine into adrenaline every day to keep their productivity high in the short term. But then as the months unfold, they're starting to feel exhausted. They're starting to make more mistakes. They're not enjoying their work. So we don't enjoy life when our dopamine's becoming depleted. Like I said, we actually literally see less color in the world. We feel exhausted. We become reactive. And sadly, what happens is some people go into this state, they don't understand what's happening, and they quit their job. They pack it in. And then, of course, if high work demands was already an issue, and we see this at EEO, we see this in different organisations, a lot of people have really high work demands, and then they start to quit. They leave and they get high turnover rates, which, of course, makes it much worse for everybody else. And all of that effort that goes into recruiting and training new people is very costly. So the cost of burnout, we get an increase in absenteeism because people are exhausted, people's immune systems are shutting down. So yeah, they are actually getting sick more often. We get reduced productivity, and then ultimately we get higher turnover rates. So we've seen that as various studies have been done. A Gallup study showing that people who are going into burnout 2.5 times more likely to quit their job. 60% of people experiencing burnout intend to leave because we know we just can't keep doing it. So WHO, World Health Organization, is saying it's costing us 322 billion annually not managing burnout, people not understanding this phenomena. So what can we do to mitigate that? Firstly, we need to educate people so that we know what's happening. So yes, absolutely, managers and organisations need to look after things like work demands. They need to create great organisations. But for me, sometimes I can actually handle really high levels of workload. Sometimes there's so much I can get done in a day. So I don't necessarily want my manager saying, no, don't do that today. I only want you to do this, because sometimes I can actually cope really well with high workloads. And other times it's harder for me. So it's really important that we become self-aware of when we're converting our dopamine into adrenaline, because I don't want to go around saying, stop working hard. Because it actually, as it turns out, when we're healthy, hard work is really good for us. We as human beings are actually designed to wake up in the morning and to contribute to the world, to solve problems, to do things that are meaningful and help other people and help our family. So work isn't the enemy, but it's understanding when high workloads are turning into workaholism, perhaps, or it's understanding when the stress that we're experiencing isn't good for us. So we need to understand that as individuals, as workers. Then, of course, we need good management, identifying psychosocial hazards, looking at things like work demands and leadership and policies and procedures and clear work demands, clear job descriptions, so that when we come to what we know what we're meant to do, because where's our dopamine going to go if we don't know what we're supposed to do? It goes all over the place. That's not good for us. So good psychosocial hazard management is great to mitigate burnout. And then providing a positive, inclusive work culture. So we come to work, we basically feel happy at work. We enjoy getting things done. We feel accepted. We're not worried we're going to get harassed or bullied, and we can actually come to work and do our job. So these are the main strategies that we've got. So Price Waterhouse research is saying that for every dollar we invest in this, there's a $2.30 return. WorkSafe is also targeting this at the moment. So that concludes what I have to share about burnout. Perhaps I'll just give you a moment to reflect and integrate all of that. Take a couple of deep breaths. And then I'll hand back over to Franca.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So much of this content I've listened to before, and I've still taken like more and more notes. So every time I listen, I get something out. As you take a couple of moments to breathe into what Charlotte has just talked about, I'd love you to type something in the chat. There might be a one sentence, a one line, a one action that comes up for you. I mean, there's so much that I've written down. Some of it's around, so focus on my breathing, my heart rate, and choose one other stress response, because the starting point is knowing when I'm physically stressed. That whole concept of completing the cortisol cycle, that we're wired to do that about twice a week, but we're starting the cortisol stress but not letting it go. I learned something new when you talked about the fight, flight, and freeze. So that fight is our anger response, but flight is our anxiety response. So that was something new for me, made me think about that. So if people want to go to the chat box and type in something that's useful to them, so that you are giving Charlotte, I think I'm right if I say a little hit of serotonin, would that be right? Serotonin, lovely. So Charlotte can know that something that she has spoken about has actually resonated with you, and you've gone, oh yeah, that's really useful to me, that's relevant to me. Of course, the other one for me as a leader is that my cortisol levels directly impact the cortisol levels of my people. So that's pretty powerful. And so for any one of us that is in a leadership role, We want to take care of ourselves, not just for ourselves, but also for the benefit of everybody else that we're responsible for.